1 minute, I was the most efficient data analyst on the 3rd floor. The next, my boss was handing me a cardboard box with a pink slip peeking out from under the lid, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. Inefficient? Was I really? My name doesn't matter as much as what I can do. To most people at Omnicorp, I was just the quiet guy in the corner cubicle who processed quarterly reports faster than anyone else. What they didn't know is that I wasn't just processing them, I was teaching the system to process itself. My unique skill, my secret passion, is automation. I write elegant little scripts and macros that devour mundane, repetitive tasks, turning a week's worth of soul-crushing data entry into a 10-minute coffee break. I don't work harder, I build things that work for me. My boss, a man named Arthur Vance, never understood this. He was a manager of the, quote, management by walking around school, which meant he valued the appearance of work over the results. He loved seeing fingers flying across keyboards and furrowed brows staring at spreadsheets. He couldn't grasp how my reports were always perfect and always early, yet he'd often see me staring out the window or reading a technical manual. He saw idleness, not efficiency. He saw a problem. As he droned on about my failure to align with corporate productivity standards, a cold, analytical part of my brain started doing what it always does, breaking down a process into its component parts. I listened to his buzzword-laden speech, watched his predictable, flowchart-like decision-making, and realized with a terrifying clarity that his entire job was just a series of repetitive, predictable, and utterly automatable tasks. I walked through the office, the stupid cardboard box digging into my hip. Every head that popped up over a cubicle wall felt like an accusation. They weren't seeing a colleague who'd just been wronged. They were seeing a failure. Dead weight. As I passed my old desk, I saw the photo I'd forgotten to pack, wedged under the monitor stand. It was of my sister, Maya, tossing her graduation cap in the air, a grin so wide it threatened to split her face. That picture was the reason I put up with this place. Her first semester of tuition was due in 2 months, and without my salary, that dream was about to evaporate. My stomach twisted into a knot of ice and acid. This wasn't just about my pride anymore. He had just messed with my family. My boss, Arthur Vance, had escorted me to the elevator, his hand on my back a gesture of false sympathy that felt more like a shove. "No hard feelings, son," he'd said, his breath smelling of stale coffee and self-satisfaction. "It's just business. The metrics don't lie. Your engagement numbers were in the red." Engagement numbers. He was firing the most productive analyst in his department based on a metric that measured how often I wiggled my mouse. The sheer, beautiful, infuriating stupidity of it was almost poetic. It was in that moment, with the elevator doors closing on his smug face, that the idea, born of cold fury, fully crystallized. He wasn't just a bad manager, he was a predictable algorithm. His management by walking around? That was just a scheduled cron job that ran at 9:15 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 3:45 p.m. His weekly reports to corporate? A simple data aggregation task, pulling from the very same dashboards I had built for him, followed by a series of pre-approved, jargon-filled email templates. His budget approvals, his scheduling, his performance reviews. It was all a script. A bloated, inefficient, buggy script, but a script nonetheless. And I had all the source code. I had sat in countless meetings, listening to his logic, his decision trees, his if/then statements. I didn't just have his password from that one time he wrote it on a sticky note. I had a complete system profile of his entire professional existence. He hadn't just fired his best employee, he'd given his replacement a roadmap. This isn't just about getting even anymore. This is about proving a point. It's about showing what real efficiency looks like. I'm going to build a ghost in his machine, a silent, perfect digital replacement for my boss. And I'm going to document the entire thing, right here. If you want a front row seat to see a walking, talking corporate flowchart get replaced by a few elegant lines of code, make sure you like and subscribe. You're not going to want to miss this. The first 24 hours were a blur of cold fury and colder coffee. I sat in my small apartment, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the wall, my laptop humming on the dining table that now served as my command center. The bravado from my elevator epiphany had cooled into a more focused, methodical rage. I mapped out the architecture of my plan, creating flowcharts that mirrored the ones my former boss used in his presentations, only mine were for his deconstruction. I named the project Marionette. It felt fitting. I would pull his strings until he was no longer needed. I was deep into sketching out the logic for his automated email responses when a notification dinged. It was an email from Omnicorp HR. The subject line was chillingly generic. Update regarding your final compensation. I opened it, my heart rate kicking up a notch. The email was a masterpiece of corporate passive aggression. It stated that due to a, quote, post-employment review of productivity metrics, a flag had been raised. My final paycheck, along with my accrued vacation payout, was being indefinitely withheld, pending a formal investigation into time theft. Time theft. The word seemed to vibrate on the screen. He actually did it. That vindictive, small-minded man had weaponized his own ignorance and fired a parting shot. This wasn't standard procedure. This was personal. This was Arthur Vance, hiding behind the anonymous shield of the HR department, reaching into my life and taking the money I needed for Maya. He wasn't just kicking me when I was down, he was trying to bury me. Something inside me snapped. The last vestiges of this being a clever game, a project for an audience, evaporated. The analytical part of my brain, the part that saw everything as a system to be optimized, went silent. All that was left was a white-hot, silent scream. I stared at the email, at the sterile corporate font spelling out the theft of my sister's future, and the world narrowed to a single point. My hands, which had been deftly outlining code a moment before, were now clenched into fists so tight my knuckles were white. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. This wasn't about efficiency or elegant code. This was a rescue mission. I looked at my monitor, at the project folder I had named Marionette. The name felt childish now, theatrical. With a few sharp clicks I renamed it. The new name was simple, direct, and absolute, Vance.exe. I wasn't building a puppet anymore. I was writing an executable file, a program designed to run, to complete a function, and then to terminate. He had made this a zero-sum game, and my boss had just become a bug in the system that needed to be removed. There was no turning back now. He had drawn a line, not in the sand, but across my family's well-being, and I was about to erase it, and him along with it. Before I brought Vance.exe to life, I had to do my due diligence. A small, nagging part of my brain, the part that still believed in rules and fairness, insisted I try the proper channels one last time. It was a fool's errand, I knew, but I needed to exhaust the official route to silence that voice for good. I needed to prove to myself that the system wasn't just flawed, it was a fortress designed to protect its own. I spent an agonizing 45 minutes on hold with Omnicorp HR, listening to a soulless instrumental loop that was probably focus group tested to induce compliance. Finally, a crisp, professional voice answered. "Brenda speaking, Human Resources. How can I help you?" I took a breath, forcing my voice to remain level. I explained my situation calmly and logically. I cited my performance reviews, all stellar until the last one. I referenced the project completion dates, all met or exceeded. I explained the nature of my work, how automation led to higher output, not lower engagement. I even tried to explain the flaw in the engagement metric my boss had used, how it measured mouse movement, not actual productivity. Brenda listened with a series of non-committal MHMMS and ICs. There were long pauses filled with the soft clicking of her keyboard. "Okay," she said finally, her tone unchanged, as if I'd just been reading her the weather report. "I have your file here." It shows a flag raised by your department head, Mr. Vance, for a pattern of low engagement consistent with internal definitions of time theft. An investigation has been opened, and as per Section 14.c of your employment agreement, final compensation is withheld pending its conclusion. But that's what I'm disputing, I said, the frustration starting to fray the edges of my voice. The flag is based on a faulty interpretation of data. My boss, Mr. Vance, he never understood my methods. This is a personal issue, not a procedural one. Mr. Vance is a manager in good standing, sir. He submitted the flag with supporting data from the company's productivity tracking software. Our department can't arbitrate personal disagreements. We can only act on the data we're given. My blood ran cold. The data. She was using the very weapon he had aimed at me as the justification for the wound. The data is wrong. The entire premise is wrong. Are you telling me that a manager can just click a button, ruin someone's record and steal their paycheck, and HR will just rubber stamp it? We don't see it as stealing, sir, Brenda said, her voice taking on a slight edge of programmed sympathy that was more insulting than open hostility. We see it as following corporate policy. The investigation will run its course. You'll be notified of the outcome. I felt a wave of dizziness, the kind you get when you stand up too fast. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. This was it. The system I had paid into, the one I had trusted to be at least nominally fair, was a complete sham. It was a closed loop, an Ouroboros of corporate policy eating itself. There was no one to appeal to. There was no judge. There was only the data and the boss who got to decide what it meant. Fear, sharp and acidic, clawed at my throat. Maya's face flashed in my mind, her hopeful smile. The tuition payment wasn't a problem for some distant future. It was a looming, monolithic threat. So there's nothing you can do, I asked, the words barely a whisper. The process must be respected, Brenda said, the finality in her voice like a slammed door. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up without answering. The silence in the room was deafening. My hands were shaking, not with rage this time, but with a terrifying, hollow clarity. I had been naive. I had thought there was a referee. But we were the only two people in the ring, and my boss had the full weight of the institution in his corner. My attempt to find justice had only proven its absence. I was alone. The rescue mission was on me, and me alone. I turned to my laptop, the screen glowing with the empty project folder. Vance.tt. My fingers flew to the keyboard, the shaking stopping as they found their purpose. The first line of code appeared on the screen. There was no more hesitation. There was only the work. The days that followed were a quiet storm of furious creation. The world outside my apartment ceased to exist. There was only the glow of the monitor, the rhythmic click of the keys, and the intricate branching logic of Vance.exe taking shape on the screen. I reverse-engineered my boss from memory and digital scraps. I built modules for his email patterns. The sycophantic upward communication to his own superiors. The vaguely threatening downward communication to his team. The passive-aggressive sideways communication to other department heads. I coded his decision-making for budget requests, mapping his predictable biases. Always approve anything with the synergy buzzword. Always deny initial requests from the creative department. Always ask for a more detailed report on anything over $5,000. It was all there. I was building a perfect digital ghost. Then came the knock. It wasn't a friendly knock from a neighbor or the thud of a delivery. It was a sharp, insistent, official-sounding rap on the door that echoed the finality of Brenda's voice on the phone. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My apartment, my sanctuary, suddenly felt exposed. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A man in a crisp, unfamiliar courier uniform stood there, holding a stiff, legal-sized envelope. He wasn't going away. My stomach churned as I opened the door a crack. He didn't smile. Signature required, he said, holding out a digital scanner and the envelope. My name and address were printed on the label beneath the ominous logo of a law firm I'd never heard of, next to Omnicorp's own. I scribbled something illegible on the screen and took the package. The door clicked shut, and the deadbolt slid home with a sound that felt too loud in the silence. My hands were trembling again as I tore it open. It wasn't from HR. It was a formal notice of pending legal action from OmniCorp's external counsel. The legalese was dense and suffocating, but the message was brutally clear. The investigation into my time theft had yielded preliminary findings. They claimed the company's software had flagged over 400 hours of unproductive time in the last year alone. They weren't just withholding my final paycheck anymore. The letter stated that OmniCorp was formally demanding I repay the wages associated with those hours, a figure that made my blood turn to ice. It was more than I had in my bank account. It was more than Maya's first 2 years of tuition combined. This was him. This was my boss. I could practically hear his voice in the cold, threatening prose. This had Arthur Vance's fingerprints all over it. It was a classic escalation, a scare tactic designed to crush me under the threat of insurmountable debt and legal fees. He wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to annihilate me, to ensure I was too broken and too terrified to ever fight back. He had invaded my home, not with a boot but with a piece of paper that threatened to take it, and everything else, away from me. The fear from my call with Brenda was nothing compared to this. This was a drowning sensation. A feeling of the walls not just closing in, but crumbling into an avalanche of debt and legal ruin. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I saw Maya's face again, not smiling this time, but looking at me with confusion and disappointment. He had found my greatest weakness, my love for my sister, and he was squeezing with all his might. But as the panic crested, something else rose in its place. A cold, diamond-hard certainty. He thought this would make me run. He thought he could scare me into oblivion. He was wrong. He had just given me the final piece of the puzzle. My project, Vance.exe, was no longer just about replacing him or getting my money back. It was now my only weapon of self-defense. If my boss was going to use OmniCorp's system to create a fictional history of my theft, then I would use it to create the reality I needed. I had to get inside his digital life, not just to mimic him, but to control him. I had to intercept his communications, edit his reports, and shut down this phantom investigation at its source. I had to become the ghost in his machine before his paper tiger mauled me in the real world. I turned back to the glow of my laptop, the letter clutched in my fist. The rescue mission had just become a war. The legal notice became a monument on my desk. I didn't file it away. I propped it up against the base of my monitor, a constant, ugly reminder of the stakes. The fear didn't vanish, but it transmuted. It became fuel, burning away the last of my hesitation and leaving behind a cold, clear purpose. I wasn't just building a replacement for my boss anymore. I was building a firewall for my life. The final modules of Vance.exe were no longer about simple mimicry. They were about interception and control. I built a script that would scan all outgoing communications from his account, flagging keywords related to my name, time theft, or the investigation. Any flagged item would be rerouted to a hidden partition on my own server, allowing me to review, edit, or delete it before it ever reached its destination. I created a subroutine designed to slowly, methodically dismantle the case against me. It would start by subtly altering historical data points in the productivity logs, introducing plausible counter-narratives and inconsistencies that would make the initial report look sloppy and rushed. Then, it would generate and backdate emails from my boss's account to his own superiors, expressing, quote, second thoughts about the severity of the initial flag. It was a digital gaslighting campaign designed to make the entire investigation collapse under the weight of its own manufactured doubt. But deploying it was the problem. Launching the program while he was active in the system was too risky. A single unexpected action, a moment where the real Arthur Vance and the digital one contradicted each other, would bring everything crashing down. I needed a window. I needed him to be gone. The opportunity arrived, as it so often does in the corporate world, in the form of a mass email. It was a generic Office Happenings newsletter I'd forgotten to unsubscribe from. Buried between a notice about a bake sale and a reminder to clean the break room microwave was a small announcement. Congratulations to our own Arthur Vance, who will be representing the department at the 3-day Omnicorp Leadership Synergy Summit in Aspen. Aspen. 3 days. My breath caught in my chest. It was perfect. A 3-day off-site conference where he'd be distracted by trust falls and PowerPoint presentations about paradigm shifts. He'd be logged out, disconnected, a ghost in his own right. It was the window I needed. The summit started next Monday. I had 5 days. The next 120 hours were a single, unbroken stretch of existence. I coded, tested, debugged, and refined. I ran Vance.exe in a sandboxed simulation of the Omnicorp network I'd built on my local machine, watching the digital ghost of my boss answer emails, approve expense reports, and subtly rewrite the history of my employment. It was flawless. It was terrifying. It was him, but better. More efficient, more logical, devoid of the petty emotional flaws that had led us here. Monday morning arrived, gray and heavy. I didn't sleep. I sat before my command center, a fresh pot of coffee growing cold beside me. On one half of my screen, I had a network activity monitor trained on his user ID. On the other, a single terminal window, the cursor blinking patiently, greater than, /Vance.exe, At 8:47 a.m., his status flipped from offline to active. He was logging in one last time before heading to the airport, probably to set his out-of-office reply. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then, at 9:03 a.m., the light went green again. Offline. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. He was gone. The system was empty, a kingdom without its king, waiting for a new ruler. This was it. The moment of truth. My finger hovered over the enter key. I saw his smug face in the elevator. I heard Brenda's dismissive voice. I felt the crushing weight of the legal thread in my hand, and I saw Maya's smile. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was survival. My boss had left a vacuum, and I was about to fill it. My finger trembled, then fell. The enter key clicked with obscene finality in the silent room. On the screen, the cursor vanished. Greater than /Vance.exe was replaced by a cascade of scrolling text, system checks running, modules loading, authenticating. Connection established, user, Vance, status, active, A cold sweat broke out on my neck. It was in. My ghost was in his machine. I watched, mesmerized, as the program began its work. It located and quarantined the digital paper trail of the time theft investigation. It began drafting a new email from my boss to Brenda in HR, scheduled for delivery in 1 hour, expressing significant reservations about the hastily compiled data. It was working. It was beautiful. For the first few hours, I was a god, watching my creation move through the Omnicorp system with silent, perfect precision. My primary script was a simple but powerful one. Scan every file, every email, every chat log in my boss's account for my name, and reroute it for my review. The first hits were predictable. Drafts of threatening letters, a log of his call with Brenda, notes for his legal counsel. I deleted them with a grim satisfaction. But then, something else appeared. The script flagged a password-protected zip file in a deeply buried subfolder named "project_cleanse". The file name was just a date string from 2 years ago. My name wasn't in it. But the script had flagged it for a different reason. It contained a partial log from the same productivity software used against me. Curiosity, that old analytical itch, took over. Cracking the password was trivial. My boss used the same pattern for everything. A combination of his daughter's birthday and his synergy buzzword. The file unzipped, revealing not one log, but dozens. Each was attached to a name. I didn't recognize most of them, but I knew two. Sarah Jenkins from finance, fired for performance issues last year. David Chen from logistics, let go for failing to integrate the year before. Both were sharp, efficient people I'd admired, and for each of them there was a file. A productivity log showing a sudden drop in engagement, a formal HR complaint filed by my boss, and a final, chilling document, a copy of a legal notice, almost identical to mine, demanding repayment for hundreds of hours of stolen time. My blood ran cold. This wasn't personal. This wasn't about me. I was just the latest iteration of a pattern, a program he ran over and over. My time theft case wasn't a one-off act of petty revenge. It was a standard operating procedure, a weapon he used to systematically eliminate anyone who was too good, too efficient, too close to seeing what. The answer was in the other half of the _project_cleanse folder. It contained a separate set of spreadsheets, these ones tracking payments to external vendors. My eyes scanned the list. Synergy Solutions LLC, Paradigm Logistics Inc., NextGen Strategic Partners, The names were meaningless, corporate word salads. But the payment amounts weren't. They were huge, recurring, and always just under the $50,000 threshold that required secondary approval from his own superior. Using my own analytics skills, the ones he'd fired me for, I cross-referenced the vendor incorporation dates with the employee termination dates. A sickening correlation emerged. A new vendor would appear, the payments would start, and within a few months, a highly efficient employee in a related department would be fired for time theft. He wasn't just firing threats. He was using the money saved from their salaries to help cover his tracks. He was embezzling millions, creating a legion of ghost vendors, and funding it by systematically ruining the lives of his best employees. The legal threats, the withheld paychecks, it was all to ensure his victims were too broken and discredited to ever be heard. My situation wasn't just deeper than I thought. It was an iceberg of calculated, sociopathic fraud, and I had just scraped the tip. The rage I felt was so pure and cold it burned. The fear, the panic, the desperation of the past few weeks, it had all been by design. He'd done this to Sarah, to David, to a dozen others. He'd tried to do it to me, to Maya. The confrontation couldn't wait for him to get back from Aspen. It had to happen now. My hands flew across the keyboard, no longer just a wronged employee, but an instrument of justice. I wasn't just pulling strings anymore. I was writing the final act. I repurposed Vance.exe on the fly. Its new function was no longer mimicry. It was confession. My scripts, my beautiful, elegant automation, tore through his files. They compiled the vendor spreadsheets, the fraudulent invoices, the termination records from _project_cleanse, and the incriminating email chains. It was all there, an undeniable, multi-million-dollar tapestry of fraud. Then the program began to write. In the persona of Arthur Vance, it drafted a new email. It used his favorite buzzwords, his sentence structure, his arrogant, self-important tone. It was a masterpiece of digital ventriloquism. The subject line read, proactive disclosure, internal financial irregularities, and mitigation strategy. The body of the email was a full, detailed confession, framed as him getting ahead of the problem. It laid out the entire scheme, complete with attached proof, the spreadsheets, the logs, the list of employees he had framed. My automation, the very skill he called inefficient, had not only uncovered his empire of deceit, but was now making him confess to it in his own voice. I compiled the recipient list, the CEO, the entire board of directors, the head of internal auditing, the general counsel, and Brenda from HR. My finger hovered over the mouse, the cursor poised over the execute send command in my terminal. My boss was probably in a conference room in Aspen, sipping coffee, learning about leadership. He had no idea his own digital ghost was holding a pen to his throat. This was the payoff. Not just getting my money, but dismantling the corrupt system he had built. My skill wasn't just a key, It was a battering ram. I clicked the button. Back quote, command executed, message sent, back quote. The words back quote, message sent, back quote, glowed in the terminal window, stark and absolute. For a long moment, I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The frantic energy that had propelled me for the last 12 hours, the rage and focus and fear, all drained out of me at once, leaving a profound, echoing silence in its wake. The adrenaline crash was brutal. My hands, which had been so steady and sure on the keyboard, began to shake violently. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I had done it. I had reached into the digital heart of Omnicorp and performed open-heart surgery with a sledgehammer. I hadn't just exposed my boss, I had made him confess. I had used his own digital voice to orchestrate his own downfall. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of what I had just done settled over me like a physical weight. I had broken a dozen laws. I was a felon. But I was also the only person who had the full story, the complete, undeniable proof. My gaze fell on the legal notice, still propped against my monitor. It looked flimsy now, pathetic. It was a paper tiger, and I had just found the real one, my boss, and set his jungle on fire. The fight wasn't over, though. Sending the email was just lighting the fuse. If I did nothing else, the narrative could be twisted. They could paint me as a disgruntled, criminal hacker. My evidence, my confession by proxy, could be dismissed as a fabrication. I had to get ahead of it. I had to take the system that Brenda from HR had used as a shield and turn it into a sword. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wasn't calling a lawyer, I wasn't calling a friend, I was calling the police. My finger tapped the 3 digits, and I pressed the phone to my ear, the shaking in my hand making the device feel heavy and foreign. 911. What's your emergency? The voice was calm, a little bored. My mouth was dry. Hello, this isn't. I'm not in immediate physical danger, but I need to report a major crime, a multi-million-dollar fraud. There was a pause. The operator's tone sharpened slightly. Okay, sir, what is the nature of the fraud? I took a steadying breath, forcing the analyst in me to take over. My name is unimportant right now. I'm a data analyst. I've just uncovered a systematic embezzlement scheme at a corporation, Omnicorp. It involves fraudulent vendors and the framing of employees to cover it up. The man responsible is a manager named Arthur Vance. And how did you come by this information, she asked, her voice laced with professional skepticism. Here it was, the moment of truth. Through unauthorized access of their internal servers, I said, the words tasting like metal. I know how that sounds, but I have everything. A complete record, invoices, payment logs, termination files, internal communications. I've compiled it all. I can prove every single word. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint clicking of her keyboard, the same sound I'd heard when talking to Brenda. But this time, it felt different. This time, I had the data. Sir, I'm going to connect you to the non-emergency line for the Economic Crimes Unit. Stay on the line. I was transferred. I explained it all again to a detective whose voice was gravelly and tired. I didn't mention Vance.exe or the confession email I'd sent. I just focused on the evidence. The crime. The victims. Sarah Jenkins. David Chen. He listened, interrupting only to ask for specifics. Dates. Amounts. Names. I had them all. The skills my boss had fired me for, my ability to see patterns, to analyze and aggregate data, allowed me to present a case so clear, so concise, it was undeniable. Okay, the detective said finally, a new note of interest in his voice. You have all this compiled? Yes, I said, in a single encrypted file, ready to send. He gave me an official email address and a case number. After we hung up, I turned back to my laptop one last time. I created a new email, attached the pristine, damning evidence package, and put the detective's case number in the subject line. I stared at the screen, at the culmination of all my work, all my rage. The system had been a fortress designed to protect my boss. But I had found a back door, stolen the blueprints, and now I was handing the keys to the warden. I hit send. Then I shut the laptop. There was nothing more my ghost could do. The work was done. Now I just had to wait for the real world to catch up. The laptop screen went black, but the glow of the terminal window was burned onto my retinas. I saw the words "message sent" every time I blinked. I pushed my chair back from the desk, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the apartment that had become a tomb-quiet crime scene. My body felt like a wire that had carried 1,000 times its intended voltage, humming and fried. I stumbled to the kitchen, my legs unsteady, and drank a glass of water with a hand that shook so badly half of it sloshed onto the floor. Sleep was not an option. Every time I closed my eyes, I didn't see my boss's smug face anymore. I saw lines of code. Not the elegant, beautiful scripts I used to be so proud of, the ones that felt like writing poetry. I saw the ugly, brutal architecture of Vance.exe. I saw the subroutine that impersonated him, the script that forged his confession. My craft, my passion, the one thing that made me feel special, felt dirty now. It was a lockpick, a weapon. I had built something, not to create efficiency, but to orchestrate a man's complete and utter ruin. My unique skill had become a source of profound shame. I looked at my hands, the fingers that had typed it all into existence. They felt alien, like they belonged to someone else, a saboteur, a criminal. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I existed in a state of suspended animation, a ghost in my own life. I couldn't eat, I couldn't focus on anything other than the window. Every car that slowed on the street below was them. Every footstep in the hall was the police coming to take me away. The paranoia was a physical thing, a constant pressure behind my eyes. I was a fugitive who hadn't even left his apartment. I'd check the news sites every 10 minutes, my heart hammering as I searched for Omnicorp, Arthur Vance, fraud, nothing. The silence from the outside world was more terrifying than any siren. Had it worked? Had they just buried it? Was a team of Omnicorp lawyers about to kick down my door, armed with my own confession to the police as proof of my criminal hacking? I kept replaying the call with the detective. Had he believed me, or had he just logged my confession and passed it along to Omnicorp's legal department as a courtesy? I had willingly handed them the rope to hang me, betting everything on the hope that they would use it on my boss instead. The risk was so enormous, so life-altering that my mind shied away from it, leaving only a low, constant hum of anxiety that vibrated through my bones. On the third morning, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a picture of Maya, grinning. My stomach plummeted. I hadn't spoken to her in a week, consumed by my war. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the thought of her worrying was worse. I swiped to answer, trying to force a normal-sounding "hey" from a throat tight with dread. "Hey you've been quiet," she said, her voice a blast of cheerful, normal life from a world I no longer felt a part of. "Everything okay? You sound tired." "Just working on a project," I lied, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Well, don't work too hard. I was just calling because I got the final welcome packet from the university. It's getting so real. There's a payment portal for the first tuition installment. I was going to ask if you could help me look at it later, make sure I fill it out right." My blood turned to ice. The tuition, the reason for all of this. The rescue mission. In the chaos and the fallout, I had almost forgotten the simple, tangible thing I was fighting for. Her voice was so full of hope, so completely unaware of the abyss I was dangling over. She was talking about her future, a future I had gambled away, one way or another, with a few lines of code. "Yeah," I managed to say, my own voice a distant echo in my ears. "Of course, we'll look at it." We talked for a few more minutes, her chatter about dorm rooms and course catalogs feeling like a broadcast from another planet. When we hung up, I sank onto the edge of my bed, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. The weight of what I'd done, of the laws I'd broken, crashed down on me with renewed force. I hadn't just exposed my boss. I had potentially destroyed my own life, and with it, my ability to ever help her again. The silence returned, deeper and more menacing than before. The ghost wasn't in the machine anymore. It was in my apartment, in my head, and it was me. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand as I stared at the blank wall. Maya's cheerful voice echoed in the oppressive silence, a painful reminder of a normal life that felt a million miles away. My rescue mission had put her future, the very thing I was trying to save, in more peril than ever. I had confessed to multiple felonies. What good was her tuition money if I was in prison? The weight of that question was crushing me when the phone rang again, vibrating against my palm with a violent buzz. It was an unknown number, but the area code was local. Omnicorp. This is it. The lawyers. My blood ran cold, and the metallic taste of fear returned to my mouth. I answered, my voice a dry croak. Hello? Is this him? The voice was hesitant, stripped of all its professional varnish. It took me a second to place it. Brenda. From HR. She sounded like she'd been running. Brenda, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. The sound of her name seemed to startle her. Yes. Oh, thank God. Listen, she started, her words tumbling out in a rush. We need you to... The company would like to open a dialogue about the situation with Mr. Vance and your employment. I almost laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound. My employment? I believe the official term was time theft, Brenda, pending a formal investigation. I threw her own soulless words back at her, and the effect was immediate. She fell silent. Look, she finally said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. We received an email from Arthur. We've seen the files. The police have been in contact. The board is in an emergency session. The data doesn't lie, does it, Brenda? I said, the cold fury I'd felt in the climax returning, sharp and clear. Or does it only not lie when a manager in good standing submits it? That's not fair, she stammered. I was just following policy. I can only act on the data I'm given. And that's the problem, the words erupted out of me, raw and loud. Your policy, your process, is a shield for men like him. Did you follow the process for Sarah Jenkins, for David Chen, or the dozen others he fed to your system? Did you respect the process when you rubber-stamped their ruin so my boss could line his pockets? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I had her. She knew I had her. The system she had hidden behind had been exposed as a co-conspirator, and she was its face. What do you want? She asked, her voice small, defeated. The gatekeeper was asking the exile for terms. First, I said, the analyst in me taking over, breaking the problem down into components. You're going to issue a full, formal retraction of the time theft investigation against me. You're going to release my final pay, my vacation payout, and a severance package that is, let's say, 5 times the amount he tried to extort from me. That's for my trouble. Okay, she whispered. I can do that. You're not done, I snapped. You're going to pull the files for every single employee terminated by my boss for performance issues or time theft in the last 5 years. You're going to contact every single one of them. You will tell them their termination was fraudulent. You will clear their employment records, and your legal team will draft settlement offers that make them whole. Every penny he stole from them, and then some. Their names are in the file I sent the police. You have it because I know he sent it to you. A shaky breath. That's a lot of people. That's a major liability. That's a major corporate failure, Brenda. You don't see it as a liability. You see it as following a new policy. My policy. The one where you actually investigate the data before you ruin people's lives with it. I stood up, pacing the small apartment. The paranoia was gone, replaced by a diamond-hard clarity. I was a problem for my boss because I was efficient. Because I built things that worked better than he did. And your system punished me for it. It's designed to protect the Arthurs of the world and crush anyone who proves they're obsolete. You're going to fix it. You're going to create a real, independent appeals process for performance-based terminations. One that a manager can't touch. I can't just... You can, I interrupted. You will draft the proposal, and you will present it to the board as a necessary step to prevent this from ever happening again. They're scared right now. They'll listen. This isn't a request. This is the only way Omnicorp starts to dig itself out of the hole my boss dug for it. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of typing, just like before. But this time I knew she wasn't looking up my file. She was taking notes. "Is there anything else?" she asked, her voice that of a chastened student. I thought of Maya, of her tuition portal, of the future that had felt so precarious an hour ago. "Yes," I said, "you're going to do all of this by the end of the day. And then you're going to call me back to confirm it's done." I hung up without waiting for a reply. I hadn't just gotten my money back. I had forced the system that failed me to look in the mirror, and I had dictated the terms of its penance. My unique skill hadn't just been a weapon. It had become a scalpel, used to cut out the cancer my boss had planted and the broken policy that let it grow. I was still a criminal in the eyes of the law, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like one. I felt like an auditor, and the audit was just beginning. 2 months. That's how long it's been since the world caught up to my command line. In that time, my former boss, Arthur Vance, went from an Aspen conference room to a federal courtroom. The evidence I'd compiled, delivered in his own digital voice, was irrefutable. My own legal situation was complicated. In exchange for my full testimony and a detailed walkthrough of the security flaws in Omnicorp's network, the prosecutor's office offered a deal. No jail time, probation, a hefty amount of community service, and a sealed record. I was a criminal, technically, but one who had tripped into a much bigger crime. The apartment is different now. The dining table where I orchestrated a corporate coup is just a dining table again. I spent a full weekend packing away the extra monitor, the network cables, the coffee-stained legal notice. I scrubbed the floors and opened the windows, letting the late autumn air chase out the stale scent of paranoia and rage. I reclaimed the space, inch by inch. It was no longer a command center. It was just home. I started seeing a therapist. A brisk, no-nonsense woman who listens to my stories about subroutines and system architecture as if I'm talking about family drama. Which, in a way, I am. I told her about the shame, how my passion for automation, my unique skill, had felt like a poison after I'd used it to destroy someone. "You built a tool," she said last week, peering at me over her glasses. "The man you used it on had already built a weapon. You just turned his own weapon back on him. The question is, what kind of tools do you want to build now?" Her question has been rattling around in my head ever since. For weeks, I couldn't even look at my laptop without feeling a phantom echo of that adrenaline and nausea. But last night, I got an email from Maya. It was a link to a public data set from one of her sociology classes, a massive, messy spreadsheet of census information she had to analyze for a paper. "This is going to take forever," her email read. I looked at the file. It was a nightmare of inconsistent formatting, duplicate entries, and useless columns. A week's worth of soul-crushing data entry, as I once would have called it. My fingers twitched. I felt that old, familiar itch, the analytical part of my brain waking up and starting to break the problem down into its component parts. But this time, the feeling wasn't about rage or revenge. It wasn't even about efficiency for its own sake. It was about helping my sister. Hesitantly, I opened a new project folder. I didn't give it a name like Marionette or Vance.exe. I just called it Maya's Project. I started writing a few simple, elegant lines of code. A script to clean the data, to sort it, to highlight the exact information she needed. It wasn't a ghost in a machine. It wasn't a weapon. It was just a tool. A small, quiet act of creation, designed to give someone I love a 10-minute coffee break instead of a week of frustration. As the script ran, a clean, perfect spreadsheet materializing on my screen, I didn't feel like a criminal or a saboteur. For the first time in a long time, I just felt like a builder again, and I finally understood what kind of tools I wanted to build. The dust has settled. The world didn't end, but it did reboot. It's funny, I spent weeks terrified of a knock on the door, and when it finally came, it was from a pizza delivery guy. The real consequences happened quietly, through lawyers and plea bargains. My testimony, backed by the mountain of data my automation had compiled, was the nail in my boss's coffin. Arthur Vance is currently trading his corner office for a much smaller room with significantly less synergy. As for me, I'm a felon on paper and a key witness in reality. My public defender, a sharp, overworked woman who had seen it all, called it the, quote, cleanest case of vigilante justice she'd ever witnessed. The DA didn't want to put the guy who blew the whistle on a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme in jail. It's a bad look, so we made a deal. Probation, community service teaching, computer literacy at a local youth center, and my full cooperation. I handed over the keys to Vance.exe, not as evidence against me, but as a roadmap to Omnicorp's broken soul. The money from Brenda arrived, along with a settlement offer so large it was clearly meant to buy my silence. I paid off the phantom debt my boss had invented, and then I paid Maya's tuition for all 4 years. The confirmation email from the university bursar's office was the real payoff. It was quiet, it was simple, it was everything. But the real work has been internal. For a long time, I couldn't look at a line of code without feeling dirty. My unique skill, the thing that made me me, felt like it had been permanently corrupted. It was a weapon now, and I was afraid of it. I was afraid of myself. Last week, I finally took the first step. I opened my laptop, not to build a ghost or a weapon, but to help Maya with a class project. She was drowning in a messy dataset, and the old instincts kicked in. I started writing a script, a simple one, designed not to destroy, but to clarify. Not to impersonate, but to help. With each line of code, I could feel the ice around my heart thawing. The joy of creation, the simple, clean satisfaction of building a tool that works, started to come back. It wasn't the frantic, rage-fueled high of building Vance.exe. It was quiet, purposeful, and warm. I wasn't an executioner. I was just a builder, helping my sister. I'd used my skills to save my family, and now my family was helping me save my skills. I'm safe now. The system that tried to crush me was forced to change, and the man who ran it is gone. I've learned that a tool is only as good or as bad as the intent behind it. My intent was to protect my family, and I don't regret it. But I'm done with demolition. I'm ready to build again. This whole thing started as a project, a log of how to erase a bad boss. I guess this is the final entry. The program ran, it completed its function, and now it's terminated. That's the whole story. Thanks for watching it unfold. If you want to see what I decide to build next, make sure you like and subscribe. I have a feeling it'll be a lot more constructive.